Hello everyone, how's it going? Billy Ballgame here, back with another video. On this channel, I'm just a dude who loves to talk about baseball and talk about baseball cards. And speaking of having conversations about baseball and baseball cards, I was on my buddy Greg from Midlife Cards channel last night with Adam from Vintage Sanctuary. And we had a great conversation last night about kind of some quirks that we find within grading and the variations on different grades for different cards. And Adam and Greg are both amazing dudes. That's the first time I've ever spoken to Adam in person. And I love the way his brain works. Adam is an analytical guy, which I like to be an analytical guy as well. But when I turn the camera on, my brain slows down and it gets harder for me to analyze. So I'm going to do the best job I can of analyzing something based off of our conversation last night. And the gist of the conversation was that we all felt grading has gotten tougher within the last few years. And we didn't determine an exact timeline of when it got tougher or how it got tougher. We all had a consensus that we believe that it's gotten probably half a point or a full point harder, all the grading companies on their grading scale, but we focus mainly on PSA and SGC. And I believe this happened, and some of you might agree with me, some of you may disagree, and that's fine too. Let me know in the comments. But I think it happened really in the peak during the pandemic that PSA especially really started tightening up on their grading standards. And I've heard it said several times on different social media platforms that in a card in an older slab is usually going to grade a grade or two lower than a card graded in a newer slab. And for the most part, I would agree with that as well. But I think we should be careful when we make generalizations and that when we speak with absolutes. Because, and I made the point last night on Greg's channel that just because a card is in an old slab graded a 10 doesn't mean it's a 10. And just because a card is graded a 10 in a new slab, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a 10 either. And as a collector, I feel a lot of responsibility in order to make sure that I'm spending my money as wisely as I possibly can, that I educate myself on different cards that can be graded in the same grade range. For example, if I'm looking to buy a 9, because that's what fits into my budget of a certain card, I'm going to look at several 9s of that card. And I may look at old slabs, new slabs in PSA. I'm definitely going to look at SGC. And so I'm going to have kind of a wide range in my mind of what that grade looks like for that specific card. And then once I make that determination, I feel comfortable, I know what a 9 looks like in that certain card, then I'm going to go out and buy the best 9 that I can find. Now, some cards I may do more research on others. Some cards I may just trust my eye to determine if that is a card that's justified the grade that it has in the slab. So if you don't feel comfortable, if you don't trust yourself by looking at a card to determine whether or not its grade is justified, it may do you a great benefit to familiarize yourself with that. I would highly suggest going to SGC and PSA's website and familiarizing yourselves with their grading scales. And they're a little bit different. but it's going to give you a general overview of what a 9 should look like, what a 10 should look like. It gets harder as the grades go down because there are, many more variables in there that could affect the grade one way or another. So the range gets wider as you go down the grading scale. But the more familiar you are with what a 9 looks like, the better off as a collector that you will be in the long run. And it will also help you develop what your preference is as far as eye appeal and stuff like that goes on cards. And many of you know this, and if you do, then I apologize. I'm not trying to insult anyone's intelligence, but what I'm trying to do is I'm hoping to help provide some insight and maybe educate some of the newer collectors that aren't comfortable determining the grade of a card. And in our conversation last night on Greg's channel on Midlife Cards, and if you haven't checked out that video, I would highly recommend you do so. And if you're not subscribed to Greg's channel and you're not subscribed to Adam's channel at Vintage Sanctuary, I would highly recommend you checking out both of their channels and subscribing to them. But one of the points that I was trying to make to those guys last night is there can be a variance in grades. There can be a variance. We know that grading is very subjective, right? And one grader that graded a card yesterday from a certain company may grade it differently from a guy that grades it today, the same exact card. There can be some variance in there. But if you train your eye on what you're looking for, you can kind of take some of those variables off the table, so to speak. And I lost my train of thought there for a little bit, and I apologize. But my main point is that as a newer collector, potentially you can save money if you buy a card in an old flip. If you buy a card in an old PSA holder, an old SGC holder, you can potentially save money if you develop and train your eye to trust your eye over the grade on the card. And that's a lot of what ties into what we were talking about last night. So there are many, many reasons why a card in an old, let's just use PSA holder, for example, will sell cheaper than a card in a new slab. And there are a few reasons for that, and it varies on collector. So one reason that card may sell for less than an old holder is because the new holders have a lot of security features built into the new flip that the old ones didn't have. And so maybe some collectors trust the newer holders and flips more than the old ones, which that I can completely understand, especially with, the shenanigans that was going on a few years ago with fake holders and all that stuff. So the security of the newer slabs is absolutely a reason why people prefer new ones. But another reason why people prefer new ones is because there's a thought that's permeated throughout the hobby that grading has gotten tougher. Therefore, if I buy this 9 in a new slab, that card is definitely a 9. And if I were going to look at a card in an old slab in a 9, that card may not necessarily be a 9. And on the surface level, I 100% agree with that statement. And that's why it brings me to the point that the onus falls on us as a collector. So do I pause at all when it comes to buying an old slab? Absolutely not. As long as I determine that the card is graded accurately. I don't care if it's in an old slab, a lighthouse slab, or the brand new latest and greatest version of slab that PSA just came out with. I haven't seen any of those myself, but I'm going to show you some examples of what I'm talking about with new slabs versus old slabs. And I hope that it will spark some of you to, like we were talking about last night on Greg's channel, to not rely on the third party opinion. Rely on your own eye and trust yourself once you build that level of not expertise, but experience, to where you can trust yourself. And you may make mistakes. We all do. Shoot, I've made them. But it will make you a better collector in the long run, and it will help you spend your money more wisely. And as all of you know, I'm a budget collector. And so for me, I've got to be very deliberate on how I spend my hobby dollars. And I don't want to just spend that on a card I think is a 9 that I get in my hand and notice issues that it shouldn't have as a 9. And then it affects me negatively when I look at that card. And then I want to move that card and get a better version. I try not to do that, because those are dollars I could have spent somewhere else to buy one card that I'm happy with, that I'm going to keep in my collection long term. So I hope you're still with me. I'm going to move over and start showing you some cards and giving you some examples of what I'm talking about. So hold on, I'll be right back with you. All right, so I'm back, and I have made the statement before. Sorry, I'm pulling a slab out here. I've made the statement before that I think that technical grade matters, and I think that a card that's graded as a 9 should always look better than a card that's graded as a 7. If the 9 and if they're both graded correctly by technical grade. And so what I'm going to show you now is a Ken Griffey Jr. 89 Upper Deck rookie in a PSA 9. And this is in a very old holder. Greg made the comment last night that the where it says mint and 9 pretty early on in PSA's history were moved down to separate lines. Okay. So this is a very old slab. I don't even know how old. I would guess probably in the early to mid 2000s is when this card was graded. Now, does this mean that this card is not a 9? And I'm going to try to keep the glare down as best as possible so you can get a fair determination of this card. So if you look at the corners, they're sharp, and they should be for a 9, right? The centering, I think, is really, really good. It might be off slightly from left to right, and it may be off very slightly top to bottom, but it's hard to determine on these cards. So do I feel that this card is a 9? Yeah, I do, and I'll show you why. So before I talk about another card, I'll flip it over here on the back. You can see the hologram is very centered, and I don't know if this is true or not, but a lot of people say that the centering on the hologram with PSA can affect the grade. So I'm going to put a picture up here, and hopefully I can accurately describe it from memory. But this Ken Griffey Jr. that I just pulled up on eBay is currently on bids at eBay right now. And it's in a PSA 9. It's in a newer flip. I don't remember exactly what the serial number is, but you'll be able to see it when I put it on the screen. It is, in my opinion, quite a bit more off-centered than the one I have. And I mean, it's a good looking card, don't get me wrong. And maybe I'm biased because the other one that I just showed you is my card, so I feel like it's sharper. But to me, if one of those two cards are overgraded, it's this one that I have on the screen right now. And I'll flip it over and show you the back. And you can see that the hologram is also off-center. And if that matters, then it should affect the grade. So I'm not going to stand on the rooftops and tell you that one is a 9 and the other one is not. What I'm going to tell you is that given the fact that both of these are graded by the same company in different flips with a mint 9 grade, that they're not identical looking cards. So even in a 9, there can be some variance in there on what a 9 looks like. Even in 10s, there can be some variance. Now, there should be less variance on a 10 because the centering requirements and all that stuff are harder in order to get a 10. And they give 9s more leeway. But if you ask me which card suits my eye appeal preference better, I would tell you that it's this card. In my opinion, has better eye appeal. Now, I hope the person who wins this auction on this other King Griffey Jr. card would disagree and say that he thinks his has the better eye appeal. I hope that's the case. And I'm not saying that I'm wrong. I'm not saying that I'm right. But what I'm saying is you have to make that determination for yourself because it's your card, it's your money, and it's in your collection. So you have to determine which card you like better and would want to spend your hard-earned hobby dollars on. So I'll show you a couple more cards. So here is, I'm going to talk about BVG here in a second too. But here is a 1978 Topps Eddie Murray rookie card. This is in a PSA 7. Now, in my opinion, and that's one of the reasons why I bought it, and that's what I tend to look for when I look for cards. In my opinion, a 7 is a bit of a harsh grade for this card. I think it's really sharp for a 7. I'll show you the back. Now the back is very, very off-centered, and that's probably why it got a 7. But this card is on a stand behind me in my display case, and I very rarely ever look at the back. So to me, that's a really sharp example of a 7. And I'll show you another one. This is also from the 78 Topps set. This card is also graded as a 7. And it's an old holder, an old flip, SGC. I would also make the statement that for a 7, that this is also a very sharp card. This one is off-centered maybe top to bottom. The back is off-centered as well, but it's a lot better than the Eddie Murray I just showed you. So here we have a new holder, PSA, an old holder, SGC, that I would think are pretty similar cards. That if they're overgraded, or if they're graded too low, it wouldn't be by much on both of those cards. But here I'm going to show you another card from the 78 set. And this card is one that I bought fairly recently. And to me, I don't see much of a difference between this Carl Yastrzemski and the Carlton Fisk and Eddie Murray that I showed you just a bit ago. Now, hang on a second, let me find it. Now, this has some rough cuts on the edges. And you can actually see right there and right here where it looks like there are chunks missing from the surface of the card, that the edge was cut so roughly. And it's very minor, but does this card deserve a 9? And so maybe this card is overgraded. And again, this is a new flip. You can see the serial number 74. This was probably graded a year, maybe a little bit longer than that ago. But when you compare the 3, like, I would say that this Yastrzemski in a 9, if there's one of these cards that doesn't deserve the grade, it's this one. And I'm happy with it. I think it's a great card. I don't sit here very often and stare at the chipping on the edge. But I'll tell you, as soon as I got this card in from eBay, I noticed it. I didn't have my magnifying glass. I didn't loop it. But I spotted that with the naked eye. And so to me, this should not be a 9. And again, that's just my opinion. Now, the biggest difference between those two cards and this one is that the back is much, much better centered. So you have 2 different grades, 2 different flips. To me, very similar looking cards. And to me, there should be a difference between a 7 and a 9. A 7 should be able to have a nick on an edge or a chip on a corner or something that I can see with my naked eye. Now, let's talk about BVG for a second. I've also heard it stated commonly that BVG does not grade cards as strictly as PSA or SGC. And I believe that statement is pretty commonly accepted within the hobby. And that people looking to buy BVG cards and crack them out and send them in to PSA or SGC usually see a downward bump of 2 grades. And I've got 2 cards I'm going to compare. One graded in PSA, Ozzie Smith rookie in a 7. And I love Ozzie Smith, as you all know. I've wanted this card almost my entire life. This is a great card, and I love it. We all know the issues that this card has with centering. And the 79 set really in general. But this one is legendary for its horrible centering. But next, I'm going to show you a BVG 6.5 of Ozzie Smith. Now, at first glance, would you see much that would separate these two grade-wise? Here's the back. Very off-centered on the back. But my brain normally tells me that if I'm looking at a 6.5, I'm going to be able to find some dings on corners. I'm going to be able to find some chipping that I'm not necessarily going to have to use a magnifying glass to see. And right here, there might be kind of a stain on the surface. So do I feel that this BVG is accurately graded as a 6.5? You tell me. And again, I think this is a great example of a 7. You can see a ding on that corner. So which one of these two cards would you rather have? Now, granted, it's only half a grade. But still, a half a grade, especially when you're going from a BVG 6.5 to a PSA 7, there's a big bump in price there. So what's your preference? Which one of these two cards would you rather have? And I would rather have the PSA 7, but is that because of my bias for grades? Because the case could be made that this is a cleaner card. It's got sharper corners. So you got to trust yourself to buy the card that you're happy with. Now, if I cracked that Ozzie Smith out, would that be bumped down to a 4.5? I really don't think so. If that were the case, it would hurt my feelings tremendously, because that does not look like a 4.5 to me. And I'll show you other examples. So here are cards that I have cracked out of BVG slabs and crossed over to SGC. So here's a 60 Warren Spahn. That was in a BVG 6.5 holder. I cracked it out and got a half a grade bump down to a 6 in SGC. And I was fine with that because, as all of you know, that's the range I look for in my 60 set. And this was a really sharp card in a BVG holder. And I would also think that it's a sharp card in an SGC holder, even with the half bump down, or half a grade bump down. So here's another one. Here's a Cincy Clouders. That was in a BVG 5.5 that I cracked out and sent into SGC. And it again got a half a grade bump. Now, do I think it was accurately graded by BVG as a 5.5? Yeah, I probably do. Do I think it's accurately graded by SGC as a 5? I think so. I think both of those can be true. And so again, this was a great looking card in a BVG 5.5. And in my opinion, it's even better looking card in an SGC 5, just because I really like the slab. That's the reason why I cracked those two out. Now here is another example, and this is why you really have to trust your eye, and you have to look at the cards very carefully, because this is a card that I made a mistake on. Some of you have seen this on my channel. So this one, I believe, was a BVG 5. It might have even been a 6. I don't remember exactly. But when I sent it in to SGC, it got bumped all the way down to a 3.5. And what is that because it's a horrible card? No. Do I believe that SGC graded this accurately because it's really sharp for a 3.5? And I do think they graded it accurately because there's a crease in it. There's as Adam said last night, there's a surface wrinkle right here on the bill of his cap. And it's tiny. You may not even be able to see it from this angle. There, it's picking up a little bit better. It's right in here. There's a surface wrinkle on it. It didn't show up in the pictures. I didn't look at it as closely as I should have. I bumped it out or cracked it out of that BVG 5 or whatever it was slab, sent it into SGC, and was appalled when it came back a 3.5. So the statement can be made, and this is kind of proof that the BVG scale is a little bit differently. You can probably have a hairline crease in an SGC 5, but I've never seen one. And Here's an example of one that was in a BVG 5 or 6. I think it was a 5 that had a crease, and then it got cracked out and it bumped down to a 3.5. Is that BVG's fault? No, that's my fault. I missed it when it was in the slab, and I didn't see it on the pictures on eBay. I didn't see it when I cracked it out of the slab and looked it over again. And then I didn't notice it until I was appalled at the 3.5 grade and then inspected it much more closely. So I'm going to flip this back around and then I'll wrap it up. So the point is, there's no statement about grading or anything else in this hobby that is absolute. It is not always absolute that an old slab is going to be a 9 isn't going to be a 9 in a new slab. It's not always the case that a BVG is going to be graded 2 grades higher than that same card if it were graded in SGC or PSA. I've given you examples of both. So what it all boils down to is you have to develop your eye and you have to trust yourself and what you're looking for in the cards. And I still think that Alk line is a great card. I'm going to upgrade it at some point because now that I know there's a crease in there, and maybe this is just my OCD brain, now that I know there's a crease in there, it bothers me. I don't like creases. Like, this isn't a T206 Ty Cobb. If it were a T206 Ty Cobb, I would be more willing to accept creases. And I wouldn't be buying a 3.5 in a T206 Ty Cobb anyway. It would maybe be authentic or a 1, and I would expect it to have creases. But in cheaper cards that are relatively easily available, for me, eye appeal matters more. Especially, a card that I can find for $50 in a 5 or 6. Then I would rather have the nicer example and pay another, $20, $30 to get it. But that's just my opinion of what I like to do within my collection. And those of you out there that are still with me, I would highly encourage you to do what you think is right for you in your collection. There are a lot of people in social media, a lot of influencers, and I'm not going to bash anyone for being an influencer. Like, I try hard not to influence anyone. I'm on YouTube because I love baseball cards and baseball, and I love to talk about them. But I realize that with that, whether I want to or not, and I've heard it in the comments and I've received emails, that I have influenced people to make a certain purchase of a certain card that they developed another level of fondness for after I talked about it, or whatever the case may be. That is never what I set out to do in YouTube, but I understand that other people watch my channel and other people may be influenced by what I say or what I buy on my channel. And if that's the case, I can't prevent that. That's that individual's decision. I try to influence positively, and I try to leave as much as possible my feelings or opinions about the hobby and grading and all that other stuff out as much as I possibly can. And it creeps in there from time to time. I'm human, right? But I try to keep this channel focused on my collection, what I'm doing within the hobby, and really that's it. So be aware of other people. Well, be aware of everyone. Be aware of me. Be aware of Greg. Be aware of Adam. We're just giving our opinions. People can claim to be experts all they want to, but I have never seen a college diploma or a trade school certificate on baseball card collecting. So if you're especially if you're newer to the hobby, educate yourself on what you want in cards and the direction you want your collection to go. If I were to tell you that this 1992 Donruss Dwight Evans is the coolest card that has ever been made, am I wrong in that? Now, maybe I'm making an overreaching statement, but generally I'm not wrong in that, because I'm just stating my opinion that this is truly the most awesome card that I have ever seen. Now, that's just an example. I don't mean that. But if I did, no one can tell me otherwise, because it's my money and it's my collection, and you all should collect how you want. And there are a lot of people that don't like graded cards. There are a lot of people that don't like ungraded cards. No one is right. Everyone is just collecting what they enjoy and telling their opinion on social media. Now, there is a subsection of people that are in it for the clicks, okay? And I'm not going to say that that's right or wrong. This is America. We're in a capitalist country. People can make money on YouTube. And if someone wants to use this platform to build a channel with 300,000 followers and make $3,000 a month and live off of YouTube or whatever they want to do, like, that's their channel. That's fine with me. I don't have a problem with what anybody else wants to do. But what I do have a problem with is people telling other people what to do. And no one, at least in the baseball card collecting community in YouTube, and this isn't an insult to anyone, I just want to make sure that this is understood, especially for the newer collectors. And maybe you're a collector that's just getting into vintage. Just because someone has more experience doesn't mean that they are more than, or that you are less than them because they have more experience and more knowledge about this subject than you do. Knowledge and experience is a journey, and everyone's journey is different. So another example, and this is more of a soapbox than I meant it to be, but please bear with me. So for a while, when I retired from the Army, I drove trucks over the road for 7 or 8 months, and hats off to those guys, because that is a rough lifestyle. But it was frequently, I heard, well, I've been doing this for 20 years and this should be the way it's done, or basically, I'm right because I've been doing this for 20 years. Okay? Just because someone has been doing something for 20 years doesn't mean they're good at it. And most of you watching this can take that statement and equate it to anything in life. You can equate it to your job. Now, I'm in education. I know teachers that have been teaching for 20 years. That doesn't mean they're great teachers because they've been doing it for 20 years. I've seen 2 or 3 year teachers that teach circles around teachers that have been doing it for 20 years. So, as a new collector, take all the information in. If you want to be influenced, but let it be something that you're aware of. Let it be a conscious decision. And don't let anyone tell you that you are collecting and spending your money improperly, right? Like, if I go out and I buy $15,000 worth of 86 Topps Tom Seaver traded cards, is that the best way I could spend $15,000? Probably not, right? But if I had $15,000 laying around that I wanted to spend and decided I wanted to go out and buy $15,000 worth of Tom Seaver cards, who is to say that I'm wrong if I love this Tom Seaver card and enjoy it that much to where I feel like I need to spend $15,000 on this card. Now, I would hope that I would take all that information in on maybe the reasons why it wouldn't be a good idea to spend $15,000 on Tom Seaver cards. But I have to make that decision myself. And no one should tell you what cards to buy, how to buy them, who to grade with, who not to grade with, or whether or not you should leave them raw. That's completely up to you. It's your decision. It's your collection. It's your money. So I think I'm going to wrap it up at that. So again, I apologize. I got kind of sidetracked a little bit, but again, the moral of the story is build your experience level. Look at lots of cards. Look at lots of cards in different grades so you can see that not every 2 has a crease in it. It may have rounded corners. It may have a stain. It may be missing paper, or whatever the case. There are lots of things that could be going on with a 2. But despite of all the reasons why it can be a 2, if it's graded properly, there are still technical reasons why that it's graded as a 2. And so just determine what you like and buy what you like, and don't let anybody tell you that you're collecting wrong. So I'll leave it at that. So anyway, if you're still with me, I appreciate it, because this has been a 40-minute long video and I did not mean for it to be this long. But again, I appreciate all the support. Again, please go to Greg at Midlife Cards channel. Check out our conversation last night that we had with Adam from Vintage Sanctuary. They're both amazing guys and, in my opinion, wonderful positive influences within the YouTube community. They're coming and speaking from experience and perspective, but they never come across to me ever as trying to tell someone how they should collect. And I appreciate that. And those guys are both great, and I love their channels. So until the next time, have a good one, and I'll talk to you later.